known Tom Gumbleton?
Well, I've known Tom certainly since I've been ordained, which would be 41 years. He's older, so he was already ordained when I came into the presbyterate. Um, and I think I maybe heard a little bit about him when I was in the seminary before ordination, but it's mostly over the years of being a priest in the same presbyterate that I've known him. I could just talk some already, or unless you want me to answer your questions directly, or
Yeah, you run into each other, or you just because you were together. Was there a specific story that you met, or?
No, I don't remember. He was just one of the presbyterate. When he became significant in my life, as was probably true for many people, was when he was made a bishop. That's not to say that he isn't a good person as a good person, and he certainly is. He's a good person. I think in the judgment of many people, a very faithful follower of Jesus. But there are other people out there who are good persons and who are faithful followers of Jesus. And I think, what's really been significant about him is that he's been a good person, a faithful follower of Jesus as a bishop. And as a bishop, he's been more significant, I think, in people's lives in that role as a bishop. And I would certainly say that has been true about myself. Like I would know him as a friend, and we would share a lot of views together and everything. But his particular significance in my life comes from him being a bishop. And the one example I could offer, and I would say that I could share this story now, but I was, as a diocesan priest, thought I would be, and was in fact in parishes for the first years of my ministry, the first 14 years. And then I had this feeling that I should become part of, in a full-time way, the Catholic worker movement. And it's very rare to have a diocesan priest be assigned as his assignment to the Catholic worker movement. But I thought I would try to do this, so I wrote to the bishop, who at the time was Cardinal Dearden, and asked if this could be my next assignment. I was finishing up an assignment as a pastor at St. Bridget in Detroit, and I asked if I could do this. And it took a while for me to get word. I think it actually took a year before I found out. But when the year was over, I got the word back from the diocesan office that indeed I could do this for a year. I could try this for a year, and then after a year they would review it. Well, so I came down to Day House and was here for a year and really liked it. But when the year was up, I did get a letter from Tom. Tom was my regional bishop. He was, at that time, he was the regional bishop for the city churches. And so he was my regional bishop. That Cardinal Dearden really thought he really liked what I was doing and everything. But even at that time, there was beginning to be a shortage of priests and parishes. And he didn't feel like, in conscience, he could really spare me for parish, so that I should just make a decision to go back into parish ministry. And the way the process was, I could apply for a parish over the coming year, and if I didn't apply for a parish in the coming year, at the end of that year, the diocese would assign me to a parish. So I met this letter with some consternation, and Tom himself was very sympathetic and said, this probably is going to be good news that you're going to hear or anything. But if I can help in any way, let me know. But then during the course of this year, this ensuing year, Cardinal Dearden retired. And there was this gap of, I don't know, maybe 9 months or so before his successor, Cardinal Sciacca, was named to be the Cardinal of Detroit. So my whole thing is just on the back burner. And then Cardinal Sciacca comes, and nothing happens. Nobody ever says anything about this letter from Cardinal Dearden saying I was to go back into a parish. So I just kept doing what I've been doing. And I think what happened was Tom Gumbleton just never told Cardinal Sciacca about this letter. And so I've been doing this now for 28 years. And I think it's basically due to Tom Gumbleton that my assignment continuing on as a full-time person in the Catholic worker movement, I owe to Tom Gumbleton, who as a bishop was my regional bishop, and he wanted me to kind of stay here, and he didn't actually defy any orders or anything, but I think it never got brought up that there was this letter in my file that's saying I should go back after a year. So for me, in a very personal way, his being a bishop was really significant in my ministry. So that would be something very personal. I'd also say, I think, and this I would share with a lot of other people, that he would be the bishop that I would most look to on questions of conscience. In the church, we always say, our principle is we're supposed to both follow our conscience and to form our conscience. And when we try to form our conscience, we look to the teachings of the church. And I do try to consider all that the church teaches on a particular issue, an ethical issue or something like that. But I'm always really interested in what Tom Gumbleton has to say about a particular topic, whatever it may be, abortion, stem cell research, closing of churches, any sort of issue that's sort of an ethical issue, a justice issue. I really will pay attention to what he has to say, and am always interested in what he has to say. And I think I share that way of looking at him with a lot of people. There's a lot of people who still, we feel like we do want to hear what the hierarchy has to say to us about ethical issues. But we really would give a lot of attention to what this particular person in the hierarchy would say. And his guidance has been, I think, helpful at a lot of things. We still have to form our own consciences, but his guidance has been helpful, I think, for a lot of people on a lot of issues over the years. And in this way, it isn't just a personal thing, but I think he has sort of even a national significance and international significance. And people pay attention, a lot of people pay attention to how he understands the church teaching, and how he presents it to people, and what he feels the church is being called to do.
And that's, you bring that up. Tom almost seems out of step with the official church in a lot of ways. And the question I to ask people is: Tom that's out of step with the church, or is the church out of step with Jesus? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, the church is always called to further the mission of Jesus. And I would say I've experienced disappointment in the years after the Vatican Council that the church leadership has not been as faithful as it seemed to me it was to the gospel of Jesus at the time of the Second Vatican Council. And that's a general statement about the church leadership, but Tom Gumbleton would be the exception to that in my own mind. It seems to me that we have, as a leadership, we're not as faithfully following the gospel of Jesus as we were in our pronouncements, in our willingness to tackle issues, and in how we bring out things. My big example, and maybe this would be where Gumbleton would show, the church leadership in Rome is quite clear about the wrongdoing of the United States government in the war in Iraq. It's quite clear. Pope John Paul spoke about it many times, and I haven't heard Cardinal Ratzinger, now the present Pope, Pope Benedict, speak any differently. But it's hard to hear anything along that line from the United States bishops, with the exception of Tom Gumbleton, and maybe there's a couple others too. But so it's issues like that make you sort of say, why I would say I feel some disappointment. It's not that I'm. Well, I'll just stop it. I'll let it go at that.
It's funny. You and Sue Statler, and you're not a canon law lawyer, are you?
No, not at all.
But it's kind of funny how, like Sue, who I think has studied canon law and stuff, she went into lawyer mode, what I consider lawyer mode in answering some of the questions, because I know none of you want to say anything bad, and but at the same time, I can understand you want to, I'm asking you questions that are kind of critical, and you're trying to reply diplomatically sometimes. I know Sue was doing that, and I'd ask her if the camera was off, she'd be like, blah, 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 blah. Stood at the camera, well, it seems that there are certain people that, and it got very,
right.
And so, and I know.
You have to deal with that.
And I'm working with it, but it is funny. Tom, is more people have said it. I just, and just knowing how I know him a little better now, he does seem to live his life like Jesus does. He lives very simply, and as you do, I know. And can you maybe describe that? We were just at his office, shooting him in his office, and I showed David. I said, "This is his room. This is, Can you just describe that?"
Well, what I guess I would say about when I'd be asked about his living simply, I would, that seems to be my impression, but I'd have to say I don't know any details, and I think that's wonderful. I mean, he doesn't parade it before the rest of us. I really don't know exactly how simply he lives. I don't know how often he eats each day. I don't know how he spends his money. I've heard about his room as being very simple, but it isn't something that's sort of a matter of public record, and I think that's the way it should be, that if you're trying to follow the gospel of Jesus, there's certainly a lot of admonitions about not parading your goodness or your holiness in the eyes of people, and not even letting your left hand know what your right hand is doing, and I mean, to me, that would be a very positive thing for me to say that I know very little about his personal simplicity. I have no doubt that he has that, and I mean, just his physical appearance, he's a pretty lean guy, and I mean, he's drives a simple car and stuff like that, but I'm sure there's much more about it that I don't know, and I think that's the way it should be, actually.
And that's a good point about Tom, is Tom to me almost seems like this dichotomy. He's a quiet, introverted person for the most part. He likes praying quietly and stuff, yet here's this guy with a bullhorn sometimes.
Right.
Can you talk about that whole aspect of Tom, how there's like kind of two sides of, not two sides, but there's
Well, actually, I think in that way, again, he would be pretty, we talk about him as being a very faithful follower of Jesus, and I think Jesus himself had both a contemplative side and an activist side, and part of being a faithful follower of the gospel is a matter of holding together tensions. And that would be one. I mean, in some ways, a really faithful follower of Jesus is somebody who does take time for prayer. I mean, Jesus himself would spend the night in prayer, long periods of prayer, and yet be very active in confronting injustice and stuff like that. And it can look odd, to see that, how it can seem like a contradiction. He's sort of an introvert and an extrovert or something like that. But really, in the gospel life of Jesus, there's a lot of tensions that are held together. I mean, Jesus himself is very Jewish, and yet he has this world view. He's very serious about everything, and yet in a way he kind of plays. Sometimes he writes in the sand, he comes in Jerusalem on a donkey. I mean, he knows how to be not too serious about it. So a real faithful follower of Jesus, I think, is someone who at the same time is very serious about some things, and yet doesn't take himself so seriously, and is even in a way kind of playful, can enjoy things, and can certainly have time to be quiet in prayer and hold all that together in one person. I mean, that's, again, I think that characteristic of somehow being out there on the front lines and yet retiring into a quiet room is something that would be, for me, another way of affirming that he is a faithful follower of Jesus. I might have to hold this for a second because I think somebody's coming in the door here. Whoops, come on in. That's okay. We're just giving the...
Well, we'll go with the Vatican II thing a little bit. There seems to be this, and I'm putting you in this group as well, I guess. There's this group that really was affected by Vatican II. I knew nothing about Vatican II. I was born in *64, so I was like, I guess it was happening, or but Tom and probably yourself and people like Norm Thomas, and they saw what the church was like before Vatican II, and they saw what Vatican II accomplished and did. And nowadays it seems like there's almost this desire to go back, and you guys, I think having a vision of what the church was like before versus what it could be, should be, or under Vatican II. can you talk about how maybe that affected Tom or affected a lot of that group of priests?
Well, I mean, I can't say how it affected Tom because my observation of him, I've never heard him express disappointment or depression or anything about this whole shift in ed. I mean, I think it's real. It's been documented by some sociologists that there is a significant shift within priests, that priests who are ordained now have a different perspective about ministry and the church than priests who lived through the Second Vatican Council. I mean, I think it's just a fact that has to be recognized. To me, it would be, I mean,
well, let me rephrase it maybe.
Yeah.
Just not to throw your thought off, but what do you think has made Tom and Norm Thomas and some of these priests the way they are? Was it just the '60s, that whole peace love thing, or was it Vatican II, or was it a combination of the two?
I think the church and the world are always in dialogue with each other, and I think the so-called '60s had an effect on the church and Vatican Council. The Vatican Council in turn had an effect on the '60s. I mean, I could tick off a number of things. Certainly there was a reawakening within the church of the need for a social justice, a concern for social justice. That was also in the world. We had a civil rights movement, we had a peace movement, and so forth. There was another instance in a totally different way. There was an awakening in the church of the value and good of sexuality. And that was certainly also going on maybe to extremes in the '60s in the culture, but it certainly was a part of the '60s. But gee, when I was growing up before the Vatican Council, I mean, is what I mean by that. When I thought if you wanted to be holy, and if you were a man, you just had to be a priest or a brother, and if you were a woman, you had to be a nun, that if you were a lay person, you were a second-rate Catholic, or a second-rate Christian. But the Vatican Council said that put marriage really on an equal plane with celibacy, and so there was this sort of affirmation of sexuality, and that was certainly going on in the culture too. So the two things there was just this interplay, but we were all shaped by that. I think another instance would be when before Vatican Council, maybe now, we were very concerned about having a Catholic identity. I mean, to be a Catholic, and you could tick off the things, it meant that you went to Mass on Sunday, you kept your Sunday off, you didn't eat meat on Friday, you fasted during Lent, you went to Mass on holy days, or when you went to communion, you didn't eat after midnight. I mean, there were certain things, and this is what it meant to be a Catholic, and it was very important to identify yourself as a Catholic. Growing up as a Catholic, I mean, I just had this sense, I don't know if anybody ever told me this, but I should marry a Protestant, I mean, there was a girl that crossed the street from us, I think she was Lutheran, and I think the Lutheran parents felt the same way. They didn't want us to mingle, I mean, but that was the 50s, So then Vatican Council come, and the '60s are coming along, and there's this sort of openness to I mean, maybe the culture wouldn't put it this way, but the Vatican Council wouldn't put it this way, that God is present in other places beyond the Catholic Church, that the Holy Spirit is present in other places beyond the Catholic Church, that grace is present beyond the Catholic Church. And so there was this openness to find God and grace in the world, in the cultural movements and stuff. And that kind of fit in with the sort of openness that was going on in the culture. Maybe people could say it was sort of a relativism, that it didn't matter what people believed, or something like that. But there was this sort of interplay within the church. But we bought the church part of that, I mean, we certainly grew up feeling that a person was graced whether or not they were Catholic. And it wasn't that significant to be a Catholic. I mean, it was good to be a Catholic, but God wasn't boxed into the Catholic Church in that way, And so that was all significant to us. And it does seem like at this present time, maybe because things did become much more open and much more fluid, and we were recognizing that the grace of God was present everywhere, maybe a newer generation wants to reassert the particular characteristics of Catholicism, what it means to be a Catholic and stuff, and they're going through that. But to me, it's not as significant, I do enjoy having some conversations sometimes with priests who are ordained more recently, and it's interesting. I mean, they might classify me as well, he's just a social worker. He lives at day house. He's not in a parish and stuff like that. But I would sort of want to talk with them and say, well, Christ came to establish the kingdom of God on earth, to make earth a little more like heaven, a little less like hell. This is his whole mission, and so this is the mission of the church. And that means that we can't just stay in the sanctuary, that we have to be out here in the world. And why, is that something you have trouble understanding? We could have some good conversations, but there's obviously some differences in emphasis right now. And Gump and I would share, because, there is something to say, and I think maybe Tom would say this too. You sometimes think that, I sometimes think that the decisions I've made, I just sort of made on my own because of who I am as a person and stuff like that. But there really is something to say that the environment, the age that you grew up in is significant in your life. Like, I probably would have to confess that if I had been born in 1964 instead of being ordained in 1964, I probably would be a very different priest. I might not even be a priest. I might say, well, I can be holy and be a lay person, and I don't need to be a priest to be holy. I think I was ordained because I thought if I wanted to be holy, I had to be a priest. After the Vatican Council, people, if they want to be holy, they don't have to be a priest. They can be a lay person. Holiness is the vocation of everybody in the church, and that was a real shift for us. But so I might not even be a priest. So that environment really shaped us. I think I would be a different kind of Catholic, and maybe or maybe not be a priest. I think hopefully I'd still want to be holy. But if I was born in 1964 instead of being ordained, that's a humbling thing to admit that your age shapes you so much, but I think it does. And probably Tom would say the same thing, that we were shaped by growing up in the 50s, and then we were shaped by the Vatican Council. And when you live has an impact on your personal life.
Oh, what a great answer. Everything okay still? Okay. Got that on tape, right? Good. And I'm trying to figure out where to go with that, because there's so many things that Tom, and not just Tom, but Tom's views on gays and ordaining women, and everything seems to all fit in with that. And it's very accepting, but it seems like the church itself is closing in. As I think maybe it was Tom who said it. That Vatican II was an opening of the window. I forgot the Latin term for it, but now it seems like they're trying to close the window.
Yeah, right. Nail it. Shut. Right.
Yeah, and so is that a reaction to the culture today, or what's happening?
Well, I think it's both. You don't want to just. It seems clear to me. It seemed to me that the trends in the church today are less faithful to the gospel of Jesus. But on the other hand, I think what the people who support this restricting and closing the windows and stuff why they're doing it is they feel like there's this sort of atmosphere in the culture where anything goes, and Christ isn't really for anything going, and we have to get back to being more definite and precise about certain issues and stuff like that, and reaffirm that a Catholic Christian is somebody who should really, be apart from the culture. And again, I would agree a Catholic Christian should be somebody to be apart from the culture, but for me, I'd say that means we shouldn't be for war, and we should be against poverty and stuff like that, where the culture is really for war and really for allowing a lot of people to be poverty and stuff like that. But it's a different way of understanding. It's hard. We really need to have a lot of. I don't want to say that younger priests who are more recently ordained, I would not say at all that they're not sincere or good people, but we really do need to have more conversation with them than we're having, I think. And I think when you do have conversation with people, there is a chance that things get better, that people can see things a little bit more from each one's point of view or something. I don't want to just dismiss everything about the way the church is now, but it is, to me, I'd have to say personally, it's disappointing to see the way the church has gone, and it seems like it's less faithful to the gospel than the church was during the days of Vatican II.
I don't want to keep going on, but there's, it seems like there's not the emphasis on peace and justice or these social issues anymore. I mean, letting alone what they're doing at Blessed Sacrament, all the money spent there. I'm a member of Shrine of the Little Flower, and we're putting on a huge, $1 million edition type thing out there. And I see the work that you and Tom do, and it just seems like they've gotten away from it. Is peace and justice still important?
I think it's less so.
I didn't hear my question, so if you could work
okay.
Peace and justice.
Peace and justice, I think, is less so within the church today. It seems to be less so in the hierarchy. I think they, certainly at least in United States Catholic bishops, they seem to deliberately not want to say anything about many peace and justice issues. When you look at the agenda of the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops in recent years, the last 5, 6, 7 years, I mean, it seems like they try to not speak on issues that are in the world, certainly on war and peace, certainly, and I would think on poverty too. So we are at a period where I think in the general tone of the church and what we're saying to the world, to our nation, that peace and justice is not something that's being emphasized, and there is a desire, it seems like, to focus back in on more internal matters, which I think is too bad.
Everybody feels the same way. I've heard that several times. That the church is looking inward instead of.
Yeah.
And then finally, just a couple small things. What do you think people will say about Tom in the future?
Okay. That people will say different things about Tom depending, I think, on where they are. If you're not in Detroit necessarily, I mean, I think the significance of Tom nationally and internationally is as a prophetic bishop. Here in Detroit, he certainly is a prophetic bishop also, but we would see also the more pastoral dimension. I mean, many people in Detroit will say about him that not only does he speak out on this issue or that issue, but he came to my affair, he did this for me, he did this personally thing, he wrote me this letter, he responded to this need. Certainly the people of St. Leo, I think, would see him as a pastor. So there is that pastoral, he is a good pastor. And he really is concerned about people's needs and concerns and things. And in fact, it's that pastoral concern that probably, I'm sure, is what impels him to do the prophetic things. But kind of outside of Detroit, I think what the significance he will be seen as this sort of, especially in these days, as more, as this lone prophetic bishop, among the U.S. bishops. It's probably exaggerating saying alone. There must be somebody else out there, but I can't think of anybody at the moment. But I think within Detroit, while also affirming that, ratifying that, I think when people in Detroit, his significance will also be of a really good pastor, somebody who had a personal concern for people, and I mean, I think he's been a pastor to me in many ways, in the way he affirms me and my ministry, and just that's an added dimension that I think just because of the limitations of human experience, many people outside Detroit don't get a chance to see so much.
Why do you and Norm Thomas and Tom stay in Detroit and do what you do? I mean, you could, like people said, he could be out golfing out at, and why do you do what you do?
I think you're touching upon the mystery of vocation. That I once, a statement by Monsignor Kern, who's a very revered priest in this archdiocese, he was a pastor of Most Holy Trinity for many years, has always been significant for me, and I've shared it with a lot of other people, but he has this statement, and I don't know if it was an original to him or if he picked it up from somebody else, but he says your vocation is where the cries of the world meet the deep joy of your heart. And there's lots of needs out there, lots of cries in the world, but what evokes a passion in you? Now for myself, Gumbleton, Norm Thomas, working in the city evokes a passion within us. It's not to say there aren't other great needs out there. I mean, there are a lot of needs out in the suburb as well. A lot of people with lots of problems, and I was in the suburbs for 9 years, and I enjoyed my ministry, and I felt like I did good work out there. But then just after that 9th year, in my instance, I just felt I had to get with poor people. That I was just in danger of becoming too much of a functionary if I stayed in the suburbs. But not everybody who's in the suburbs has that feeling. But for me, it just was an inner feeling that it was almost a matter of the state of my soul, that I had to, if I wanted to really stay faithful to Christ, that I just needed to get in the city. I think that's a very personal thing. And it's hard to answer it otherwise. There's just a vocation mystery, the many gifts that there are in the church, and some of that is a gift. Some of those gifts are, the Spirit gives some people a gift to a city ministry, to working among poor people, and those are not always the same, because obviously there's many people in the city who aren't poor, but there are different gifts, you know, and the people you mentioned, Gumbleton and Thomas and us, all have that gift, I think, or we feel that's our vocation, and that's what makes us happy. That's our passion, and you just have to follow that.
Is there anything you wanted to say that I didn't ask you? You told the story about how Tom...
No, that's my one sort of anecdote that might, and I feel like I could say it now because all the principals have either died or they're retired, and I only have 3 more years to go till I'm 70, and I don't think anybody's going to put me back in it. I don't think anybody would hear this would say, you know, you mean you should be back in the parish, go back and get the file, but usually if you assign even somebody to a parish, it's for longer than 3 years, so I don't think they can put me back. I think I'm just going to stay at the Catholic Worker for the next 3 years anyway. At this point, I would not have shared that like 10 years ago, but you know, I think it's safe to say it now. And you've got a cat in your thing if you want.